travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am your gracious host, Captain Frodo, and thanks for coming back again this week. Now, over the last month, many things have happened in my life. I have had to leave Las Vegas. We packed up our house, and that is an enormous undertaking, and then having to move to another continent. As glorious as it is to have arrived here in Norway, it has put a dampener on my normal, well-kept schedule for writing a new essay every month. But it has also allowed me to boil away on some of these ideas, and the writing that I did leading up to this month has taken on gargantuan proportions, as you can see from the length of the episode you've just downloaded. And I thought that this will be then an experiment, see how it is to just run a little longer, because I have more to say. And your feedback will be welcome. And I don't know if I've actually mentioned this on the podcast before, but I have an email. It's thewayoftheshowman@gmail.com, and your response to anything I have said, or anything you've heard, or any ideas you have for improvements or for further topics would be greatly appreciated. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Someone did manage to find me through social media and sent me a message telling me a story of how, as they were 9-year-old, they saw me perform, and they went on writing how that had influenced them and how that was an important thing in their life. And that was, as always, an extraordinarily beautiful thing to get to know. But I'm not just saying this to toot my horn and say that I'm a great performer, but last week we talked about in the Where Is My Art, we talked about how our performances are processes that don't exist, they don't leave traces in physical manifestations in the real world. The results of our art is to be found inside the heads of people and those who have watched us. And it's in there that I then find that somebody brings up something which happened 15 years ago or something, I can't remember the exact time, but that they still remember it. And now perhaps the actual nature of my act, although probably it was amazing, but it has, as the result is with memory, every time you think about something, you're kind of bringing that memory back out again, and it's being flavored and added to with your feelings. But this is another sort of aspect of what happens to our art and what our art actually is. Just getting an email and being reminded that this is, it just felt like it was the universe and this person, sort of unrelated to that podcast, I know, because that podcast hadn't come out yet, but it almost happened simultaneously in what Carl Jung would have probably described as a synchronicity, which is something we'll talk about that in the future. But anyway, I found it just interesting that these things happened at the same time, and it made me feel like, maybe that analogy is kosher. Now, I'm not going to talk very much here today, because the actual main content of this episode is very long, and in fact we are going to be listening to it over the next few episodes. So if you have any comments on it being a longer thing and less of me rambling on in the beginning, then drop me a line on thewayoftheshowman@gmail.com. And with that, let's get to the ideas. Mythopoetic Carnival. I believe a healthy, strong culture or community must have its own mythology. If must seems too strong a statement, I would at least say that since a shared mythology benefits and strengthens identity, creates meaning, and it can foster a deeper resonance by helping us discover and determine shared goals and potentials, and it can also create a sense of belonging both to the community who has the mythology and by understanding our place and role in a community, it can also create a sense of belonging in the world at large. So if a shared mythology can have all these kinds of benefits, I'd say mythology is a good thing. It has been and continues to be a tremendous source of inspiration for creation of art. Mythology is everywhere and portrayed in every branch of art: paintings, statues, frescoes, temples, dance, performance art, opera, and every type of music. It's also a heavy source of influence on things like Marvel movies, the Coen brothers, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, Harry Potter, and through the work of Joseph Campbell and his book Hero with a Thousand Faces, mythology was a huge influence on Star Wars. These movies and art in general draws on the fertile and royalty-free imagery of mythology, Greek, Norse, biblical, the world, folklore, and much, much more. With so many cultures and communities having their own legends, stories, and myths to draw on, my question is, what if there existed a mythology of showmanship? Or perhaps it does. Perhaps all we have to do is look. So, that is our quest. Come with me. Let's raise the sails of our showmanship and set a course for the interior, for the heart of our craft. The word mythopoetic comes from Greek and means myth-making. It's about giving rise to myths, or about myth creation. And the following explorations of the underground of our craft seeks to discover possible foundations, a landscape, and a language that's fertile enough to plant a mythopoetic seed in. If we can find that, I believe we have found a worthwhile first step towards our mythopoetic project. And seeking a mythology is valuable for my own personal development, but also as a creative venture that could be valuable to the community of showfolk at large. From my personal angle, having a firm foundation makes me a more stable person. I know I'm not unique among performers, at least occasionally experiencing the imposter syndrome, the persistent inability to believe that my success is deserved or that it's been legitimately achieved as a result of my own efforts or skills. This kind of doubt creeps up on me from inside myself, but I also get it from the outside. From our audiences and the world comes the frequently asked question, "Is this your real job?" The question crystallizes that whatever it is we do when we perform does not immediately appear to be something one could do for a job, which after all is a serious affair. The impression our art gives off is frivolous. It does not, at first glance, appear to have any serious purpose or value. A big part of the way of the showman is about answering that question and finding serious purpose and value in our vocation, understanding big questions like who am I? If the answer is I am a showman, then who is the showman? What's my role in the world? Because understanding this on as broad a front as possible can help me feel justified in my vocation and ultimately in my existence. And I think this is something all artists struggle with in those dark nights of the soul. The answers to these kinds of questions has, for thousands of years, been sought and found in mythology. But in a more practical way, I also think a deep and fertile understanding of my role as a showman will be reflected in my artistic creations and make me a deeper and stronger performer. I explored this idea through the language of alchemy in the Soul Spectacle episode, which was episode 6. You can express these kinds of ideas on mythology and images in a show title or you can speak about it in the script of your act. It can also be expressed abstractly in movement, dance, or displays of skills. But more than that, I don't think that these ideas needs to be explicitly stated in an act to be perceived beneficially by an audience. Because you're always conveying much more than what you are saying. A mythological foundation is present in subtle ways, like in your very presence on stage, the firmness of your conviction and sureness of yourself in the world. And I believe that your audience experiences this as depth in you and as a creator and performer, and that this is a key difference between a novice and a master showman. In these strange times, with the loss of crowds due to the pandemic, this mythopoetic project is perhaps even more pertinent. Having a deep mythology, or even just being aware that there are depths to what we do, can serve as ballast and keel for the showmanship, which recently has been lying pretty dead in the water from a lack of wind, or floating rudderless from a lack of any true and meaningful course. A mythology is ballast weight, offsetting the fleeting lightness of the showmanship, and giving it and its crew of showfolk a new stability, whilst as a keel it will keep our ship from being blown sideways and keep us on course wherever we might be heading. Now, making myths is about making meaning, and human beings are creators of meaning. Artists in particular are creators of meaning. And what meaning is a huge question, and my account here is going to be far from comprehensive. But as far as I see meaning, it is what gets you up in the morning, what drives you, that little flame of enthusiasm that powers you and that connects you to the world. Meaning is not just something that exists out in the world for us to discover. It's also not just something which exists inside us, which we then impress upon the world. Meaning is something which exists between us and the world. It's created in the interaction between the outer world and our own inner world. It is found along the midway. Something I'll get back to, but for now just place a pin there at the heart of the midway. The human brain is one of the most complex things in the universe. It is also the source of all the meaning in the universe. Since meaning is a human phenomenon, we can see dance, where a dog or an anteater sees only meaningless movement. Each tiny gesture, synchronous or asynchronous movement in a gloriously intertwined dance of two people, can express interpersonal relationships, or, it could be about humanity in the end of the 60s becoming the first species to travel to another planetary body. The possibilities for expression, meaning and interpretation are boundless. Meaning and the systems it's woven into spins out of our hearts and minds and connects us deeply to the world, its contents, and to each other. It helps guiding us to what's important in the chaos of sensory perceptions and mental constructs. And before we dive into the Mythopoetic Carnival or myth creation as a project for our community of circus, carnival, and showfolk, I want to share a few thoughts on myths. It might not be something that you've spent much time thinking about, but as it happens, I have. I am by no means an expert, but I am an ardent enthusiast, and I started by spending the entire last year of school, the grade 12, writing a thesis on Norse mythology. And the question that I asked in this year-long quest was, how does these oddball and sometimes even funny stories of birds that farts mead and mighty Thor dressing up as a woman, how could these things serve as the religious and philosophical underpinnings of life for my Norwegian ancestors? The answers were manifold and will be explored in the following episodes. But one of the lessons learnt was that a mythology, it can take practically any form and serve its purpose of meaning creation. Just because it's funny or weird doesn't make it any less deep or powerful. So I don't use the word myth lightly. Myth to me is not just some story of a crazy red-haired Viking riding a chariot pulled by goats, waving a hammer and causing thunder, like in my ancestral mythic tales of the mighty Thor. Myths were the foundational underpinnings for real lives lived in the real world, not just a philosophical or decoupled religious abstraction, but a deeply felt and experienced participation. It was the way, in a pre-scientific time, that mankind expressed their deepest thoughts. The myths were the background upon which the foreground of everyday events and processes occurred and was understood. I don't believe the people who created myths did so by simply going, "Hey man, you know what would be a cool explanation for thunder? No? You want to hear it? Yeah. Get this. Alright, a dude with a hammer is riding through the sky in a chariot pulled by goats. Whoa, dude. Totally, man." I believe there's a whole lot more to the creation of myths than just making shit up. For one, I'm not sure even that our deep-time ancestors even saw these pictures as metaphors. I think it's a chance that they might have experienced the world differently, and that the imagery they used was the best and most straightforward way for them to express it. So, let's explore this idea a little more. Because even on a surface level, it's hard to really imagine how different the world must have appeared back in the early Viking times. Cities were almost non-existent. They would probably be seen as towns, villages, or even hamlets now by our standards. There were hardly any roads to speak of, and also very few straight edges. These days we see the world around us as perfect flat surfaces at right angles to each other, glass, steel, concrete, all human-made and imbued by human thought to suit human form and purpose. For most of us, this is the majority of reality. It seems like nature or anything other than what's made by humans for humans is something that's far away and almost abstract. It's even a little difficult to find. And when you find it, it can seem pointless and unimportant, like it's begging for improvement. Looking at vast stretches of nature as a modern human being, the mental leap is so short. It's before you start thinking how the land could be improved or could be made to benefit us, or perhaps more pertinently, could benefit you personally. The natural world is not present in cities. It is far away. It requires you taking time out of your everyday life to seek it out. It involves a trip, a journey away from the everyday. And in the past, the vastness of nature, the enormous scope and scale of natural forces was everywhere, and the human-made, the artificial, was rare pockets in the immensity of the natural world. The seasons passing, one changing into the next, was not abstract. It was the be-all and end-all. The changing temperatures and the flowing of clouds, the waxing and waning of shadows from mountains, spoke loudly, and if you did not pay attention, you might not survive the winter. The world was a whole lot less busy. There were no advertising, few pictures. There was no constant chatter on radios, no music in the background unless someone, a person or an artist, was playing or singing. There were no recordings, and writing was a kind of magic transmission of meaning only understood by the very few initiated into its secrets. There were no books, no TV, no internet, no phone, no electricity. It was a dark time. When night came, it was dark. Light came from fire, and around each fire was a circle of light. You sat within this circle with your back against the dark, but always with one ear on the vast darkness behind you, and an eye on the darkness on the other side of the fire. Just on the other side of the light, the dark stretched out as far ahead as it stretched behind. Darkness all the way back to birth, and all the way ahead to death. In times like this, with the vast, bright, unlight-polluted skies exploding with the brilliant pinpricks of stars above, darkness was the all-encompassing primal state. Darkness held everything, all shapes, beings, mountains, and even the flame of light burning before you. What was illuminated was tiny. Your whole town was like a pinprick of a single star in the vast expanse of the all-enveloping dark. It's in these times the myths of the Norse mythology came into being. I further imagine it is possible that human beings of these times experienced the world differently. Not just that the world was different and they experienced it like us, modern human beings, but that their actual consciousness was not identical to ours. Of late I have been reading the thoughts of Owen Barfield, which express the idea that human consciousness has evolved. The idea is basically that in much the same way as a child's consciousness gives them a different experience of the world, ancient humans also quite literally experienced the world differently. Barfield finds evidence of this many places, but as a philologist, someone who studies words, he finds it in the changing meaning of words over time. As he sees it, words are imbued with a kind of soul which is their meaning. Each word is a tiny creation reflecting the consciousness of its creator. And he said, the full meaning of words are flashing, iridescent shapes like flames, ever flickering vestiges of the slowly evolving consciousness beneath them. He said that in his book, Poetic Diction. And it lies outside the scope of this essay to go much further into this intriguing idea of the changes in meaning of words over time as artifacts of the way people experience the world, of words as a kind of fossils of consciousness. This is all just to say that as I see it, the mental scope of myth creation is not a frivolous affair, and that the imagery of myths were a true reflection of how the world appeared to the myth creators. If the image of a pearl appears in a myth, it's not just about a pretty and valuable treasure. The image was expressed not just because of the surface of the image, but it was expressed because what wanted to be said was what was expressed in the full contents of what a pearl is, every aspect of what it is. And a pearl is a very particular kind of treasure. It's created through the constant pain and irritation of an oyster. A grain of sand, an irritant, a disruptor of comfort triggers a process in a placid blob of flesh hiding inside its hard shell. Eventually it becomes a precious treasure, but only to a completely different kind of being, another species, a species the oyster most likely does not even know exists, let alone understands in any meaningful way. All this and so much more come into play if in a myth or legend a pearl is found or lost by a princess, god, or a little girl on an ocean-going canoe. Each image, each persona, and each story in a myth is almost infinitely deep. It was chosen for this depth, through a much closer participatory experience of the world, a time when humankind experienced the world in a more pictorial way. Each image resonated and was chosen and told and retold for exactly this deep resonance, and no doubt the myths further were shaped and reshaped in the telling and retelling, always deepening, always expanding in their interconnected web of meaning. Much like life and reality itself, because if you think you know all there is to know about a magnolia tree, it's usually because you haven't been paying close enough attention. The Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the cognitive bias in which people with low ability at the task tends to overestimate that ability, it makes fools of us all, and yours truly, absolutely included in that. There is always depth to be found, more interconnectedness and meaning to connect to and discover. This is the way. Now, as a tiny digression, mythopoeia, which is a slightly different version of the word mythopoetic, is also used to describe a narrative genre in modern literature and film, where a fictional or artificial mythology is created by a writer. And this use of the word traces back to the writer J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, and the meaning comes from this poem that he wrote called Mythopoeia. I would also say that if someone mentions an artificial mythology complete with maps and even an invented language, a lot of people would think of Tolkien. So this is very pertinent to him. I think it's almost a characteristic feature. But to add to our connections, which we're making here, Tolkien was also a close personal friend of Owen Barfield, which is the evolution of consciousness guy I talked about before. And the two of them were part of a literary group in Oxford, England, called the Inklings, which also included Charles William, a poet and occult master, as well as C.S. Lewis of Narnia and the Lion, Witch and Wardrobe fame. That's a circle of friends that I'd like to be invited into. Be a fly on the wall in there, that would be amazing. But this tradition of invented deep history is also a big part of new religious movements, what is commonly, if slightly derogatorily, are called cults. Because almost all new religions, like Mormonism and Scientology, even though they are relatively new creations, trace their histories and genealogies back into deep prehistory. So, us showfolk are in a good company on these explorations and myth creations. Now, the showman of the way belongs to two worlds. One is the world of history, and the other of myth or legend. It's an outer and an inner world, each with their own kind of history. This dual history, apart from being part of new religions, is also alive and well in an organization like the Freemasons, where there are two parallel histories of how the fraternity came into being. Historically, the first Masonic Grand Lodge of London and Westminster, later known as the Grand Lodge of England, was founded on the 24th of June 1717, when 4 existing lodges met for a joint dinner. Their legendary or mythological history, on the other hand, goes back much further. It traces its origins to the master builders of the sacred Temple of Solomon in the Old Testament and the building of the great cathedrals. And these are two different kinds of history, alive in the hearts and minds of Freemasons, speaking to different kinds of their imagination, both expressing their own kinds of truth, understood and kept in mind side by side, each enriching the other in the initiatory and the quest for moral development as free and accepted Masons. And I believe the arts and craft of showmanship is a fundamental, if not the fundamental, human activity. What we do as showmen, we do because it has been resonant with humans for thousands of years. The circus arts, the carnival arts, and the kind of material worked and presented by showmen ultimately arises from deep within ourselves. Presenting acts, rituals, and participatory symbolic gatherings for others is a uniquely human pursuit, thus 100% artificial, as the illuminated Showman's manifesto explains, which I read in the Soul Spectacle episode. And our craft is connected to deep human longings and needs, yet our craft is artificial. And artificial is often used as a bad word these days, wrongfully vilified, in my opinion. It's not natural, people say of inventions like penicillin, vaccines, or the automobile, whilst all it really means is that something has been created by human beings for human beings. And human beings are natural creatures, and the wing of a jumbo jet is an example of something created by human beings. And I think we absolutely can understand a wing as a natural creation. It was shaped by humans to fit the real world around us. Once the perfect shape was found for the wing that allowed air to be passed at speed around it, the wing could easily hold our weight. We made the wing, but the shape of it, or the potential for it, existed already out there in the world. Birds evolved their own variation of wings. And speaking of birds, is there really that much difference in a human being creating a wing and a bird creating a nest? Is the nest also artificial or unnatural, like the human-created wing? Be that as it may with the bird's nest and wings, the craft of the showman is no more or less artificial than the craft of the mason, which is masonry. Both are, if not uniquely, human activities, since birds both put on great displays of dance and also build nests, most notably perhaps the Australian bowerbird, yet there is a great deal of distance in development and complexity from a bird's bower and Gaudi's La Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. And what I'm saying here is that even though the legendary history of masonry is in a sense invented or extrapolated in a mythopoetic way, the benefits for the ceremonial and ritual experiences of its initiations are very much real for the masons. And since the bird making its nest for birds is a part of its natural behavior, I don't think it's a stretch to say that a human being creating something for other human beings is part of human beings' natural behavior. Making things up, inventing things and processes is natural behavior for human beings. Creating a mythology, an essentially artificial activity, could be said to be part of our natural behavior. So, now, let's start plumbing the depths, both the inner depths and the outer depths, because I like to explore different paths and ways of mythopoetic development, but for our time here I will be aiming mainly in the one general direction, the depth psychology kind of angle. And depth psychology is many things to many people, but for our use here it is about that which lies beneath the surface of things, our inner geography, what the popular imagination calls the unconscious, of which Carl Jung is a proponent. The other focus is imagination, something we spoke of more in depth in the second Welcome to the New World episode. The imagination is the source of stories, the place of mythology, and where we can find kindling for our inspiration and participatory enthusiasm. Imagination is the wellspring of the great works of art and literature and of our own illustrious craft. Human beings share the outer world with the animals, plants, and ecosystems, but the inner world is solely the domain of human beings. The showman inhabits both, in different ways. In one he juggles his knives and balances on his hands, and in the other, the world between, not completely made up, yet not real in the normal sense of the word, the showman exists as something more than just a person performing his tricks on the market square. This is the realm of archetypes. And archetypes are examples of persons or processes so typical and all-pervasive, found everywhere, that it has become something more, something innate inside us all, like a kind of instinct, something inside ourselves that allows us to recognize patterns and processes in the world. Carl Jung thought of archetypes as a primitive mental image of such importance that it has become part of our psyche, forming our collective unconscious. Or maybe it's actually the other way around. But Jung's ideas are vast and multifaceted, but whether these images lies inherently buried deep in our psyche, or they are Platonic ideas like an independent, possibly even more real than reality itself, or they are concepts and ideas which seep into us in our early pre-conscious states as infants and children through culture, all of this is still debated. But for now it's enough to acknowledge that the jester, the magician, and trickster all finds their place among the archetypes, together with the great mother, father, child, devil, god, and hero. The representatives of our craft are well represented in the archetypal underground, regardless of the exact origin of these concepts. Now let's get back to the midway, because the inner world warrants another mode of exploration than the outer. It also produces a different kind of knowledge from which it is possible to derive wisdom. Or at least that's what I think. As we mentioned earlier, meaning is something which exists in the meeting of our inner and our outer geography. It is a world between. It is the midway. And in America, midway is another name for carnival, which is what the British calls a fairground, and what's called Tivoli in Norwegian. The term midway, though, that came from the Chicago World Fair, or what was called the Great Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. This boasted the world's first Ferris wheel and a seductive sensation. A woman called Little Egypt belly danced and sparked fires of enthusiasm and desire in carnival patrons. And all this was on display along what was called the Midway Pleasance, which led to was a road that led to the more respectable representations of human progress in the women's building, and then up to the glorious and so-called White City, which must have been a spectacular sight. The Midway was a grand mix of fakes and hokum and genuinely educational things. Well, we'll touch on the somewhat dubious nature of this edification in a bit. But the impact of the Chicago World Fair was so great that from then on the word midway became a more trendy word for carnival and was used across the nation, perhaps in a similar way to how today Cirque has become a whole different thing, and it has a different ring in the public imagination than Circus. Thus, via the way between, the midway, we arrive at the carnival. As you can feel, my stream of ideas and links is taking us towards the carnival. Also, that's kind of apparent from the title, but it leads us all towards the carnival as a phenomenon. Why is our mythopoetic explorations leading towards this ragtag collection of rides, shows, and attractions? And in the popular imagination, and arguably also in real life, carnivals are the lowest kind of displays of the arts and craft of the showman. It is a strange mix of people in a carnival, with the most diverse sets of skills, or no skills at all, but for selling lottery tickets, popcorn, or running a shooting gallery. And from movies and novels, we know that the carnival is the first place people goes to when seeking runaways or any other general wanted delinquent. This dark side is supremely well captured by the all-girl punk band Bikini Kill in their song called Carnival, and it begins, "This is a song about the seedy underbelly of the carnival, the part that only the kids know about. This is a song about 16-year-old girls giving head to carnies for free rides and hits of pot. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to the carnival. But it costs $16 a year. I want to go to the carnival. But I know it costs $16 now. Round, round, round. I'll win that Motley Crue mirror if it fucking kills me." The poetry of punk. Direct, aggressive, and right to the dark heart of the matter. And perhaps it is not so surprising that in searching for foundations we have to dig deep. Digging implies dirt. We're unearthing the underground. The lowest of the low is not so far-fetched as a place to find foundation. If you find any firm ground in the lowest of the low, it could be bedrock. Any erection, cultural, architectural, needs a firm foundation. The need for building your house on solid ground is advocated in both biblical mythology as well as in the fable of the three little pigs. Bikini Kill's Carnival is a place feared by every decent church-going parent, or any other parent for that matter, but it attracts youth and the common people like moths to a flame. In the example of the Chicago World Fair, the Midway apparently was the most popular attraction, with 2.25 million admissions, and a further 1.5 million of those hitched a ride on the brand new vertical rotating carousel of the Ferris wheel, which was invented by George Washington Ferris. It attracted not just the riffraff and the working class, but the rich and fancy as well. The carnival is alluring for the greater panoply of humanity. And as a slight digression, it's worth noting that the carnival aspect, the Midway of the Chicago World Fair, was a later addition, because the first director of the Midway Pleasance had created authentic villages that were supposed to provide visitors glimpses of primitive cultures, in contrast with the civilization of the fair's serious exhibits. It was a push towards garnering enthusiasm for the relatively new scientific discipline of anthropology. The thinking of the time was reflecting a, in hindsight, wrongful hierarchy and hierarchical interpretation of a rise from barbarism to savagery to primitivism and all the way up to civilization, which was represented by the glorious white city, where there was a whole lot of technological developments like electric light and automobiles. It was all on display there, a lot of it for the sort of first time and the first introduction to the general public. The Chicago World Fair really did display the dawn of a new technological world. You could literally then, in the eyes of the promoters of the fair, you could walk the ladder of progress and praise yourself lucky to be part of the culmination of civilization. And when the original Midway director's lessons in anthropology and human development failed to fully capture the excitement of crowds, and a new director was quickly hired, and soon a carnival of gargantuan proportions appeared. With it, the very first appearance of one of the most iconic carnival attractions of all time, the Ferris wheel, which was invented specifically for this. Visitors might have stopped at the different savage villages, where the Javanese village seems to have been an outstanding example, but the main attraction, as far as most visitors to the Midway was concerned, was not the anthropological insights, but the carnival entertainment. For the enjoyment and unbridled good times, few things can compete and connect like a good carnival. Excited by these exciting carnival displays, the crowds would endure a lecture. Then later on, as they've walked up, maybe Edison would espouse his wisdom and enthusiasm for his latest inventions, or Nikola Tesla would be there with his grand electrical displays, and the crowds would stand there and watch these electrical things and think, it will never catch on. Maybe they would also pick up a few of the finer details of savage pygmy culture. Anyway, most, if not all, of the varieties of expressions of the showman's craft are lowbrow. Circus is also a lowbrow art form, and by lowbrow I kind of mean popular entertainment for the people, the general public. It is unhindered by complex language or abstract forms and disciplines that the audience must know and understand ahead of time to be able to appreciate it. The manipulations of a juggler or a tightrope walker are intuitively and viscerally appreciated. And visceral literally means gut experienced as opposed to intellectually experienced. Our craft's currency is just feel it in your gut excitement and good times. The directness of what a showman presents in a circus, carnival, or anywhere else makes it a popular entertainment. It's for the people. And the crowd and their experience, their feelings and desires are very important parts of the equation for a showman and a craft. I'd say it could even be the very core of our craft. A big part of the circus industry today, perhaps in particularly the part of it which brands itself as contemporary circus, aims to lift circus out of the lowbrow, the popular entertainment, and into the arena of fine art. I'm very excited by aspects of this, because I'm always interested in any kind of art that punches upwards. But this essay is not the time and place to fully go into whether our craft is lowbrow or high art. But circus is, at its root, popular entertainment. Yet, I have found in the circus tradition that the carnival is situated on a lower rang, at least perceived to be on a lower rang of the cultural development ladder. Another reason why the carnival beckons in this search for foundations, the very deep below. People say that the carnival panders to the lowest common denominators in humanity, but you could also say that the reason each particular attraction has become a carnival staple is exactly because, over time, it has proven to be something human beings enjoy. The rides, the sweet and salty fat-fried foods, the games of chance, girl shows, and the carnival high divers performing leaps of death from super tall flimsy platforms into shallow pools of water have become carnival attractions, staple attractions from Chicago via London to Timbuktu, exactly because people are attracted to them. It speaks to them directly. In this way, each attraction, game of chance, gambling, fortune-telling, and dancing girl displays, can be seen as the desires, interests, and wants of human beings made real. It's a representation of something that comes from inside you, which you now can interact with in the real world. A physical manifestation of something inner. It's a created and realized image, an idea made flesh. In this, I see a link to the early pictorial myth creations of our early Vikings that we talked about in the beginning. In their myths, they connected their realities to the outer reality via pictorial creations. Odin, the knowledge and wisdom-seeking god who sacrificed one of his eyes to be able to see a different kind of knowledge. He got stabbed with a spear and hung from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days, upon where he discovered language in the form of runes. And this is a mythological strange loop where the picture truth of the god King Odin, the picture, the being, the character, the mythological creation of Odin goes through a sacrifice and loses one eye, one way of seeing the world, for a new way of seeing the world, now through language, through the runes, which was for the ancient Norse folk their first written language. It's a step towards a different kind of knowledge, perhaps even linking it back to this jump of meaning or development of evolution that Owen Barfield talked about. It's the birth of a new way of interacting that's discovered, a new way of understanding and interacting with the world, and also with each other. Writing and language is in the myth born from this mythopoetic wisdom seeker in the form of Odin. But coming back to the mythopoetic creation of a carnival attraction, in the not too distant past, we could imagine an attraction is presented by a showman, like he has an idea, he has a feeling that the feelings elicited by this idea made real will trigger feelings of interest and elation in others. It will capture their attention. Sometimes attractions turns out not to be attractive, just like there are no doubt gods of mythology which never made it far, a boring god or one that went out of fashion. If the idea made real of the carnival attraction captures the popular imagination, like Mr. Ferris's wheel, then it can become a part of the cultural landscape, very much like the myths which resonated and survived became part of the spiritual landscape of a people. The Ferris wheel caught the attention and thus was spread around the world. It was recreated, each showman with the skills and enough faith in the attraction ripped off the idea and presented their own version of it at another carnival. It's reminiscent of how each preacher reading from the same book can get and maintain a congregation exactly because the congregation appreciates his particular way of telling the tales. A Ferris wheel proprietor has an attraction where the preacher has the Bible. The ride is something which the people wants when they see it or hear of it. Each proprietor's Ferris wheel is subtly different. The source of excitement is different on different Ferris wheels. Riding some wheels, the enjoyment comes from the beauty and grand scale of things, like with the London Eye. For others, the more low end of the range, the excitement might come from the fear that every creak of the rusty spokes holding your dangling basket might be a sign that the whole crappy structure is about to collapse. In the same way, each preacher, each teller of the mythic tales is different, and their choice of tales and tellings can herald the sweet good news or the eschatological ends of everything by rain and fire and pandemic pestilence. And hold on to these thoughts, and we will look further into the deeper archetypal powers and origins of carnival attractions next week in part 2 of our mythopoetic explorations. Well, the explorations of the mythic carnival underground goes far and wide, and although some of it might seem a little bit abstract, it's all part of this discovery of a language and a landscape, a place, a way to start formulating and pull out another more rich way of looking at what we do beyond the everyday of, here I have 3 balls, now I juggle them, here I am standing on the ground and my friend is now balancing on my shoulders. So let's see if it eventuates into something fruitful as we are entering our last third of these episodes of the first season. I would like to thank all of you who have already scrolled down on iTunes and left me 5 stars, and those of you who even bothered to write some of the thoughts you had about the show. The praise has been phenomenal. But then again, if you haven't done it, scroll down and click. It's really the best way for my tiny podcast project to be found by others. There's also been some very, very kind listeners out there followers of the way who have shared it on their own social media. This is just absolutely excellent. If you do that, it might open up to people that I can't reach. Facebook has made their algorithms such a way that we are all stuck inside our own bubble, and even though I keep putting this up, it's rare that it penetrates out of those people who normally interact with me. So of course, if you would help and post a link to one of the episodes, your favorite, or perhaps to the whole podcast season, which all are very easy to find these links on iTunes, and you post that in your own feed, that would also be tremendously helpful, as I hope that we can reach outside of the current community and find more people out there who are interested in exploring these ideas that we all discovered together here along the way. But with all that said, this has been the longest episode so far, and with that, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you all along the way.